Hi, this is Antoine, writer and creator of The Peril of Haven, and you're about to listen to our second episode. So if you haven't heard our first episode, A Clean Slate, go back and check that out now. If you have listened to our first episode, thank you so much for coming back. If you like what you hear, make sure to subscribe. You can also follow us on social media to watch for updates and to let us know what you think. Now that we've got all of that out of the way, let's get weird. Episode 2, Influence.
It feels odd that I slept last night. Part of me was hoping some smiling horror would come in and put me out of my misery. Another part, a larger, fiercer part of me, doesn't want to give them the satisfaction. There's definitely fight in me, but it feels directionless. I've been sitting here in indecision for 2 hours. I peeked out of the door. The hall was quiet. I looked across the hall and thought about trying to talk to the old woman. But what if that other person came to the door? I've been staring at that journal. Should I do what the woman suggested? I can't trust her, but she's the most solid lead I have. She seemed aware of the smiling people, but not afraid of them. This is not normal. Admittedly, I can't say exactly what the world should be, but those people, smiling and staring, feel wrong on a visceral level. January 1st, 2020. Dear Journal, today was so cool. LOL, it's funny because it's January. It's cold outside. Anyway, I said I would start my adventures in the new year, and I did. So, just outside of town in the woods, there's this big old Victorian house. No one has lived there in forever. So I decided that it would be a good place to do some urban exploration. Is it still urban exploration if the house is in the woods? Well, it seemed like a good first step in my new life, but I didn't want to start my adventures with jail time. So I went on a realty website to find out who owns it and contacted her. Real nice lady named Mrs. Jameson. She's still in town and is pretty influential, apparently. She said she appreciated that I didn't just trespass on her old family home. She agreed to meet me there this morning and show me around. So I brought her some fresh-baked rolls and a thermos of tea to thank her. It was a great house. You could tell it's been abandoned for a while. There were some broken windows, and there was graffiti on some of the walls. Mrs. Jameson told me that most of the kids who did the damage hadn't been able to escape her reach. Like I said, she's an influential lady. Anyway, we started in the basement. There was a mural down there that was out of this world. She said it's usually hidden to keep it safe from hoodlums and vandals, but she opened it up for me. Get this, it was locked up behind a false wall. She even had this stone tile that she pressed into an opening in the wall to use as a key. I felt like I was living in a Saturday morning cartoon. The mural was definitely the highlight of the tour. The rest of the house was cool in a sad way, but nothing else really stood out except for the furniture. It was impossible not to touch. The only downside of the tour was the top side. The attic felt like the walls were going to fall in on you. The one cool part of the attic was that she had a table just for the mural key. Okay, to be honest, I don't know that the table was only for the key, but it fits into the whole gothic mystery story I have in my head, so I want to believe it. We finished our tour, and she walked me to the door. I offered to walk her back to town, but she just stared at me until I thanked her again and left. Well, that's it for now. I can't wait for my next adventure. Fresh baked rolls and a thermos of tea? I was apparently a huge fan of Little Red Riding Hood. And who laughs at their own jokes in writing? The more of this journal I read, the more I feel certain that losing my memory was a boon from the universe. In any case, I know what I need to do next. I have to go visit this Jameson house. I'd like to note that I'm not doing this because that mystery woman told me to, but because maybe Mrs. Jameson will give me more answers than she did. I underestimated how shaken up I still am from last night. Leaving this apartment was an unsettling experience. I found myself jumping and twitching away from anyone who got too close to me. I looked around wildly for any smiles that seemed less than natural. I think I may even have been muttering to myself. I can only imagine what people must have thought. I realized that I would have to talk to someone to find out about Mrs. Jameson, and to be able to do that, I would have to not look like I might start screaming at the first person who got too close to me. After an hour or so, when I started to feel calm, I stopped at a diner for breakfast. Thornfoot's Diner. Pancakes to sell your soul for. A little on the nose, but it seems like Haven is going for that creepily wholesome aesthetic. The pancakes were $7 and came with eggs and bacon, so either souls go for cheap here, or I'm fine. After a meal and some more walking without any pursuit or threatening smiles, I felt calm enough to ask after Mrs. Jameson. On my walk, I discovered another park. This one was in a more affluent part of town. I figured I'd start there. Every single person I talked to looked at me as if I were crazy. I suppose walking around a park asking after an influential lady wasn't the best plan. I decided that being dressed so casually didn't help either, so I went and got some nicer clothes. Nothing fancy, but if I need to go to a restaurant or try getting information from someone, better clothes would lend credibility. After taking care of the clothing issue, I decided to try a different tactic. I went to a nearby convenience store, behind which I saw several teenagers smoking. I asked them if they had ever heard of the old Jameson house in the woods. Of course they had. I asked if any of them had ever been there. All of them said that they had, but at this point, things started to get away from me. They were all accusing each other of lying. Some were laughing and telling stories about times that others were supposed to go in and backed out. One of them defended themselves by saying that I hadn't asked if they had gone inside. It was tedious enough listening to them once, I don't need to recap the whole discussion. They knew how to get to the house. Once they had ascertained that I intended to go in, they insisted on walking me there. They stressed that they wouldn't go in with me, as if I wanted them to, because that place is haunted. I very much want to dismiss their claims that the house is haunted. People always mistake decrepitude for creepiness, but I'm feeling particularly open-minded today. I would have waited for the morning, but those kids insisted that we had to go at night, as if they were the ones going in. That isn't to say that I was scared, but I was hoping that I might run into Mrs. Jameson, and it didn't seem likely that an old rich woman would be wandering her abandoned property in the dark. I do think the kids were hoping that if they waited until nightfall, they'd get to see me run off in terror. I don't hold it against them. I was probably just as desperate for entertainment when I was their age. I'm avoiding again. As I said, they wanted to wait until dark. I came back home to get some things. In my closet, I had what I can only describe as a utility belt. I put it on and slipped 3 flashlights into it after testing that they worked. I also took a pocket knife, some cord, and a travel first aid kit. It was good to see that I had at least prepared for my adventures. I met the kids at the edge of the woods. They seemed amused that I wasn't using the light on my phone. Truthfully, I don't even think to carry it most times. It must be a holdover from when I gave up social media. Besides, who would I call? We walked through the woods, the kids jumping at each other and moaning to try to scare each other. And probably me. It didn't work, but their laughter was louder than I would have liked. All I could think was, no wonder Mrs. Jameson never had a problem catching the kids who trespassed on her property. Silence fell, and I knew we must be approaching the property. These kids were actually frightened. One of them actually told me that I didn't need to go in. She said if it was a bet, they would back me up and say I had gone in and walked around the place. The rest agreed. That was the first time I could remember genuinely smiling. I thanked them for their offer and for their escort, but assured them that I would be going in and that they should go back home before their parents worried. That seemed to liven them up. They brushed off their parents full of bravado, then wished me luck and started to head back once again, making more noise than I was comfortable with. I was right about one thing in my journal. That house was sad. As I walked through the gate, it was obvious how grand it had once been. That someone would let it deteriorate to this degree seemed almost criminal. The gate had been chained shut. Fortunately for my purposes, it was also knocked onto the path leading up to the house. There were intricately carved corbels on the porch posts. The windows on either side of the door were stained glass, but broken. I walked into the foyer to find a hall leading to the left and the right, and a grand staircase leading up with doors on either side of it that I would later see led to a kitchen. I decided to start with the attic. Based on the journal entry, it seemed like the mural in the basement was what I needed to see, so checking for that stone tile key seemed like the best plan. It seemed unlikely that it would be in the same place after over 2 years. But all I could do was hope that I was right about the table being the designated place for it. I walked up the stairs, and like I said in my journal, there wasn't anything noteworthy on the second floor. I found myself wondering what I had meant by the furniture was impossible not to touch. I didn't feel drawn to touch anything. If anything, I very much wanted not to touch anything. I didn't bother exploring the rooms. I headed straight for the staircase I could see at the end of the hall. At this point, I was getting nervous. The air felt wrong somehow. There was a heaviness in my chest. As I got to the 3rd floor, I saw a narrow staircase leading up into the dark of the attic. Something about its placement, in the middle of the hall rather than at either end, seemed ominous to me. I found myself trying to break the tension by saying out loud, "Well, Mrs. Jameson is obviously in good health if she walked up and down all of these stairs just to let a stranger explore." When I spoke, something seemed to come alive. The slight uneasiness I had been feeling turned into outright malice. Of course, I wasn't going to stop there. I continued and started up the stairs. Just as my head was cresting the threshold into the attic, 2 things happened simultaneously. My flashlight turned off, and I could feel fingers on the back of my neck. I wanted to think it was a bug or a spider web, but I reflectively threw my flashlight behind me and it hit something soft before rolling to the floor. I jumped up the rest of the stairs and spun around, pulling out and turning on a fresh flashlight. There was no one and nothing on the stairs. Eager to get on with my business and get out, I risked turning my back on the stairs and wildly swung my flashlight around, looking for the key. There, on a table in front of a small window, illuminated by moonlight, was a stone hexagon the size of my palm. I don't know if I would describe it as Saturday morning cartoon, but it definitely seemed too grandiose, as if it were a haunted house that someone had built to amuse thrill seekers. I am decidedly not a thrill seeker. I don't care what my journal says. I was not amused. I put the tile in a pouch on my belt and turned to leave. In my journal, I said the attic seemed like the walls might fall in on you. That was as true as saying the ocean in the storm is wet. The walls were reaching for me. They weren't in danger of collapsing on me. They wanted to enclose me. I know how ridiculous that sounds. Walls don't want anything. I know that. I know it in my head. But my gut told me that those walls wanted to smother me. I fell down the stairs. I tried to run and rolled right down, and I was grateful for the time that saved. I jumped right up and started to make my way to the stairs going down. My discarded flashlight was on the floor pointing toward the attic steps. Of course I didn't stop to get it. I still had 2 more. As I rounded the landing, the stairs to the 2nd floor ran parallel to the 3rd floor hall. Right then, when my head was level to the hall floor, my abandoned flashlight came on, pointing toward the attic steps. I stopped and shot. Down from the darkness came a pair of pale arms, too long with too many joints. They slowly came down. No body was visible. Just the unending arms. Just then, the flashlight turned slowly and stopped on my face. For the 2nd time, I fell down the stairs. Evidently, I had a talent for understatement. As I mentioned earlier, in my journal I said that it was impossible not to touch the furniture. On my way up, I didn't understand that. I thought that I was perhaps just an invasive person who couldn't help but to touch other people's things. No. It seemed I wasn't the invasive one. Fingers seemed to grow out of the various parts of the furniture, down on the legs where they scuttled the furniture toward me, on arms of chairs and doors of armoires, reaching out and elongating to caress me and pluck at my shirt and hair and face. I ran down the stairs to the 1st floor, prepared to forget about the mural, but the coat rack was coming toward me. Do you know how many fingers can sprout from 6 coat rack hooks, a thick base, and the shaft? If you would like to, I suggest you go to the Jameson house and take the time to count, because I did not. I ran through one of the doors next to the grand staircase. There was another door across from me, and coming at me from the other side of the kitchen with arms elongating was a woman who I assumed must be Mrs. Jameson. Behind me, I could hear wooden fingers scratching at the door. I ran to the door across from me. I stopped just in time not to fall down the steps. I closed the door behind me and used the cord I had brought to bind the latch. I slowly headed down the stairs. I could hear laughter coming from the kitchen as the doors from the foyer slammed open. Then the latch jiggled. The laughter stopped. I kept moving. The latch jiggled again, and I could hear Mrs. Jameson yelling and banging on the door. I didn't know how long it would hold, so I looked for an exit from the basement. I didn't see one, but I did see a wall with a small hexangular indentation. I rushed forward and shoved the key in. I figured if I couldn't escape, I may as well see what I came for. When I pushed the key in, a stone lip popped out from the bottom of the wall. I lifted it, and there was a mosaic. and out of this world doesn't do it justice. Somehow, with shards of glass and stone, the artist managed to convey motion and energy. In the center was a mirror. I can't explain how I knew it was a mirror. It didn't reflect anything back at me, but it was a mirror to its essence. I was transfixed until the basement door burst open. Mrs. Jameson was humming as she slowly came down the stairs. Her hands, stretching and groping, were visible before any other part of her. I didn't think she would be willing to answer any of my questions about my last visit. I looked around and acted out of instinct. Using my flashlight, I smashed the mirror. Curiously, as the shards fell to the floor, they reflected the room as they should have been doing while the mirror was whole. Everything was silent. There was no dramatic scream, no puffs of smoke, no piles of ash. When I looked up, I was simply alone. I went upstairs. The coat rack was in the kitchen, and a chintz armchair was stuck halfway through one door. I walked out. The second I stepped off of the porch, I felt a pain in my head, and for just a moment, I had a flash of a field with a circle of stones. I didn't come home with any answers. I came home with a bruised body, a strained mind, a frantically pumping heart, and more questions. What was that field? What was happening in the Jameson house? Most importantly, why did that woman want me to go there? I'm going to have to call her. Not tonight, though. Maybe not even tomorrow. But she needs to give me some answers. Again, something kept me up. If Mrs. Jameson was whatever she was, how did I find her before? Was this something that happened in the past 2 years? That would explain the understatements in my journal. But what about the similarities? It was almost like I was warning myself about the attic and the furniture. Even a comment about Mrs. Jameson's reach. I don't think I'll get much sleep tonight.
That was The Peril of Haven, released on the first and third Mondays of most months. Written and directed by Antoine Martinez-Jones. Narrated by Benji Diver. Our music is by Conic O'Neill. Make sure to check out the show notes for our website and social media, where you can find out more about the show and everyone involved. I hope to see you next time. And don't forget, smile.